Hi, I'm Ross Anderson, and this is the Global Fine Wine Video and Podcast. Now, these episodes are intended to inform, educate, and entertain you on all things wine and bring you the stories about the people behind some of the very best wines in the world. Now, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share with your wine-loving friends. Now, the theme of today's podcast is deep roots, dogged patience, and time. And you'll understand all of this shortly. Now, today I'm joined by Australia's finest sparkling winemaker, Group Sparkling Winemaker for Accolade Wines, and the man behind the House of Arras, Mr. Ed Carr. Ed has been making wines for more than 35 years, and his patience and determination have helped turn Australia into a serious sparkling producer, as well as putting Tasmania on the wine map. In 2018, Ed received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Champagne and Sparkling Wine World Championships in London, the only winemaker outside of Champagne to win this award. Ed has been voted Winemaker of the Year twice, and in November of 2022, the Arras E.J. Carr Late Disgorged 2004 Sparkling was voted Decanter Wine of the Year. A few days later, the museum-released 2001 Blanc de Blanc won the Sparkling Class Trophy and Wine of Show at the Global Fine Wine Challenge here in Sydney. House of Arras is the most awarded sparkling winery in Australia, with more than 80 trophies, 220 plus gold medals, and an unparalleled reputation of producing world-class sparkling wines of exceptional age. The list of achievements keeps going, so let's bring Ed right into the discussion. Good afternoon, Mr. Carr. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks, Ross. Excellent.
It's great to see you. Thank you for making some time to have a chat with us. I have a couple of quick rapid-fire questions to get us going, get the mind going. Cricket, AFL, or rugby?
Cricket, I'd go highest. Yeah, closely followed by AFL. Yeah.
Beaches or mountains?
Beaches.
This one might be a bit tricky for you. Pinot Noir or Chardonnay?
Or Chardonnay.
Sweet or savoury?
Savoury.
And most important question, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, or Led Zeppelin?
Stones.
Oh, there we go. Classic. Ed, want to get straight into the meat and gravy here, where it all started for you. Can you tell us a bit about your personal story, where you grew up, and maybe one of your favourite childhood memories?
Yeah, I guess I was the youngest of a family of genuine 10-pound poms. Came over to Adelaide in 1964. My father was a watchmaker and jeweller. And after a 6-week ride on a ship, we pulled into Adelaide. So, and we moved out to the suburbs then, which was the new satellite city concept of Elizabeth, and we grew up out there. So, very much a government public school boy. Grew Elizabeth Vale High and Elizabeth High School, and then on to university from there. So, it was interesting times in Elizabeth. It was quite booming at that point. The growth was very strong, and the auto industry and other industries were big then.
Which university did you go to,
Ed? South Australia. So at that stage it was called the South Australian Institute of Technology before university became more fashionable.
And how did you catch this wine bug? You were more interested in science and microbiology. So how did this wine connection plug into what's become this legacy?
Purely by chance, I suppose. I don't know if it was destiny that I have a degree in chemistry and food microbiology, and that took me into the dairy industry for a little while. And then I saw a more exciting job, I thought, as a laboratory technician at a winery, which was called Glenloth Winery, and that was at Runella, which was part of the Seaview Winds Group. So I always thought that I'd stay in microbiology microbiology and chemistry, really, almost, the white coat and the big glasses sort of thing. But as it was a smaller winery, I got more involved in the winemaking side of it. Notable people there at the times was Pam Dunsford and Brian Walsh was there. Later, guys like Mike Farmelo and Peter Taylor. So a lot of big wine maker names coming through the place, but also the Seaview sparkling wine at that point was all traditional method, and it was a very big brand. And the base wines were made at the winery I was at, but all the secondary fermentation and the disgorged stages and whatever was done at McGill at the Romalo cellars just next to McGill. That's awkward. That was interesting times there. Norm Walker, who was the manager there, sort of befriended me and had a lot of confidence. I don't know why, because I was so green to the whole wine game, but they're having difficulties with secondary fermentation, which in sparkling wine is a bit awkward. And they felt that since I was a trained microbiologist, that I could fix it. So we did eventually, but it wasn't ever that simple. And I progressively got more and more involved with sparkling there. So not just the secondary side of it, but the actual base wine making stage. And eventually that group was purchased by Penfolds Wine Group, and they moved all the sparkling operation up to New Ypres, and I moved up there with them in 1986. So it was on-the-job training, really.
And during that time at Penfolds, what can you tell us about how you developed as a winemaker and maybe led the path for where you've gone today? Was there anything significant that happened then?
I guess we had a bit of a focus on premium sparkling wine and what we really needed to make things happen. So obviously Chardonnay and Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier were the go. They had a sort of premium program that was happening in sourcing from cool climate vineyards, but really cool climate vineyards were very different. People considered Clare to be really cold and Patouet, which now, they're sort of mid-range areas, I guess, not picking on those sites individually really, but people's expectations of cooler climates, drove into areas such as the Yarra Valley and Tassie and such, Macedon, Tumbarumba, all of those. So we started that program of sourcing fruit from those. And we started to get those wines out with the 90 and the 91 vintage, but I jumped ship in late 93. So didn't see the full fruition of those, but I learned a lot about traditional method there. I was managing the sparkling wine cellar as well. So, I learned a lot of the mechanics about it. Probably learned more in wine making with the second role with what was then B.R.O. Hardy, which is now Accolade. Getting more involved in wine making and the actual vineyards themselves.
And could you give us the highlights reel from your perspective of the evolution of sparkling wine in Australia over the last 5 years?
Yes, I think, I'd sort there's been two phases to me, and I think there was a revolution sort of in the 70s and 80s when vineyard sourcing went from obscure varieties in warm regions, to Chardonnay, Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier in cold climates. And you saw with the likes of Chandon, probably Yellow Glen in a very different vein to what it is now, in that original Smythesdale operation. Andrew Peary in Tasmania, Hanging Rock, John Ellis, all doing some very interesting stuff with fruit from much colder climates. So I think that was the revolution part of it. And then the evolution part has been that area since, where people have just honed in on the styles that they want to make. And, house styles are much stronger and easily identified to, I guess, that's those sort of early learning stages. And I think Australia does sparkling wine really well from the budget end right the way through to the prestige. There's not many wines in that anybody should be ashamed of. There's some really good stuff out there.
You got any hot tips for other areas? I mean, we know Tasmania is where this is all happening, but if there was an area on the mainland, where would you focus be?
I think there's some great ones coming out of Orange at the moment. Those ultra high altitude vineyards. I think they're very different too, because within Australia, you obviously geographically massive. You get cool climate from either altitude or latitude. I think the wines are very different from different regions as such, but Orange is standing out as probably the highest altitude of the big island where fruit's grown, and it's really very fine, elegant, longevity, all the good things, but very different in style to what the winemakers are doing out of Tassie.
Sure. Yeah, sure. Let's talk about Arras. Your current role at Accolade, what does that entail?
Group sparkling winemaker means I oversee all the sparkling wines for the company. So some pretty big brands in there, such as Hardy's, Crozer, Yarraburn, Grant Burge, and Arras out of Tas. So it's a coordination role and really trying to focus in on styles, what makes those styles, and really aiming to keep up the tradition and the making of those wines that have become successful in their own rights. Some of those brands are by acquisition, so they weren't part of Accolade from the ground up, but I think for us it's so important to be able to keep those styles very separate and support different taste groups within the market.
And so do you have input into the winemaking, any involvement in the winemaking, or sign off on the final product? How does that work?
Probably all three. We look at vineyard resource and where we think the fruit for this wine style should come from. So that's a big part of the job to ensure that people know where to find the fruit that we need for all of those brands. Through the winemaking team, it's really identifying, apart from regionality, what winemaking steps drive each of those styles and identifying the key steps. And then the third one is really signing off with each of the winemakers on that style, and then taking them right through to the Disgorged stage and have a consensus and agreement on where each wine should be placed in terms of styles through the dosage and such, and then hope we've got it right after that.
At the moment, you're doing amazing. With a specific reference to Arras, which was founded in 1995, tell us a bit about Arras. When I was looking at the House of Arras website, I noticed that you pick fruit from 6 areas in Tasmania, and it's quite interesting that each region does a specific thing or brings a specific attribute to the final wine. Tell us a little bit about that. I mean, are you buying the fruit in? Do you own the vineyards? Is it a bit of both? How does that all work?
We own the Bay of Fires vineyard, and we lease others, and we have a sizable amount of contracted growers. I guess if I go back to 95, I guess with Arras, we didn't know. We just had this concept of let's make a good sparkling, really, with what was then the Hardy's group, and knowing the varieties that we wanted, and we'd had experience in other regions, and we just literally went with a checkbook to buy fruit that was available on the market in Tasmania, and probably much lesser fruit than what we get now in terms of quality and chasing a certain style. But instantly we saw this when we saw the juice, and then we saw the wines that we made. We thought, well, this is the place that we wanted to be. And it was very obvious after a short amount of time that all the various sub-regions in Tasmania, with their individual terroir, gave us different styles. So we source from all of those regions listed there, really. There's been a lot of focus on Piper's River with a lot of other brands. We're more, particularly with that Arras range, more focused on the East Coast and the South. So the big ones for us really, and at our top end, are the Coal River Valley, the East Coast, and the Derwent Valley. But we do use parcels, particularly from Piper's River, when we want something from a region that's a bit steely and going to tighten up a blend. So Piper's River works for us for that sort of concept. And Tamar Valley when we want something that's a bit warmer and a bit more generous. So having all of those blending options is really proven such a strength of the brand. So and the East Coast works exceptionally well for Chardonnay for us. So more inland for the top end Pinot, and more coastal for the top end Chardonnay.
And while we're talking about this, can you explain the concept of tirage and the program that you use at House of Arras?
The wines we're looking at today are all traditional methods. So as a basis, these wines are all hand-picked. They're all whole bunch pressed. We use the free run juice only, so up to 500 litres per tonne. They're all, what was I going to say then? They're free run only. They're all 100% malolactic fermentation to give us a bit more softness and complexity. And they're all, they have some sort of oak treatment. So with our oak policy, we use a smaller percentage of quite young oak. Quite young, it's first or second use. And we're usually less than 10% oak in the blend, which has really tightened up the wines and added another level of complexity and depth and tannin. We really think tannin's an important part of sparkling wine. Not many people talk about tannin, but it's a structural part of it. So that's where we are with the base wines, I guess. All of those operations blended to give us the final base. And I guess the biggest thing that's amazed us with Tasmania is really the longevity of these wines when they're in tirage. So when they've been blended as a base, yeasted, and then go through their second fermentation in bottle. The first Arras we released was a 4-year-old wine. Now we're releasing 15 and 20-year-old wines. And I guess that has been the major sort of wow for us, if anything, that they can live so long and still be, bright and fresh. So tirage, Tasmania and extended tirage is really what Arras is all about.
Question for you, which I think people watching and listening to the podcast would be interested in finding out. When you are looking at the grapes in the vineyard, what factors do you have in mind that determine that grape is ready for picking? Is a measure of sugar, acid, etc. Is it slightly different to how a winemaker making a still wine, a Chardonnay or a Cabernet or a Shiraz? Is it slightly different to that?
We're still looking at the same sort of analysis. We're looking at Beaumet for sugar and acidity, but we always make sure that we're tasting that fruit pretty regularly. So we're generally harvesting at about 11 Beaumet, 11 to 11 and a half. So, which is quite often a little bit riper than other styles, but well behind the sort of table wine levels, which are 13 and a half sort of plus. So, yeah, we look for the balance really of when the sugar levels are moving into the right zone to get the right final alcohol. Acidity, we're looking at balance there. But it's interesting, like each year we'll vary the harvest depending on where we think the flavour development is sitting with regards to those sort of basic analysis. And it's interesting, like in a cool year this year, if you look straight at the numbers, you'd think the fruit was ready to pick, but quite often when we're tasting them, we're just putting them off another week just to allow the flavours to come up.
So are you spending a lot of time in the vineyard in the weeks leading into harvest?
Yeah, one of the winemaking and viti team in Tassie does a circuit of all the vineyards once a week.
Oh.
And either myself or Ella Hoban, who's the other sparkling wine maker involved with Arras, we tag team it to join them and make sure we keep an eye on the sparkling fruit as well.
And so that would go, what, 3 or 4 weeks? You'd be just doing the circuit? Is that right?
Usually 2 to 3. I mean, we've got about a 3-week picking window across all of our different areas. So at least 2. If it's a cruisy vintage, it could be 2. If it gets difficult, then we might need another look at specific sites.
Right. And so you pick early morning and get it sent down to the Bay of Fires facility. Is that correct? Yep.
Yes. So all the fruit for this level, for the traditional method labels, are hand picked. So they start early morning. They start arriving in the winery from about 5:00 p.m. onwards, and the presses run overnight to press all the fruit out.
Wow. Sounds like a fun time of year to be there. Ed, tell us about the benefit of aging on lees, the leftover yeast particles. Specifically, could you explain to everyone listening what lees are, how they contribute to the final product?
Yeah, I guess these wines have a second fermentation, and that second fermentation happens in a bottle, the same bottle as you purchase the wine in. So the yeast, there's yeast and sugar added to the wine, and then it's bottled, and it gets a crown seal cap on it, like a beer cap. And that fermentation lasts about 2 to 3 weeks for us. So, and the right amount of sugar is added to produce the gas level that we want, which is around about 10 to 12 grams per litre of sugar of gas. But when that fermentation is over, say 3 weeks generally, there's no carbon substrate for the yeast to live on, so it just progressively fades away and dies. And then you have this concept of lysis or autolysis, like self-lysis, where the yeast cells actually break down, and as they break down, they release a lot of proteins and basically yeast-flavoured compounds to the wine. So during that time in tirage, where it's on those lees, which is just the yeast sediment, 2 things are happening. The yeast lees is breaking down, and also the wine's aging, and they're happening in parallel. So you've got the wine aging and the yeast autolysis, that's secondary characters building on top of that wine age.
And so to the punter that's opening a bottle of Arras and tasting it and goes, oh, that's a toasty or a bready flavour or notes. Is that as a result of the lees? That is the lees interacting, is that correct? Or part
I
of?
think it's part of. The lees modifies very significantly the aging of the wine. It's building up that creaminess, it builds up the toastiness, all those sort of classic secondary characters.
Yep.
But there's a lot comes through from aged Chardonnay and aged Pinot. Very different parts of the wine are coming from there as well.
Ed, tell me, what's the one thing about this Arras venture that you didn't expect?
I think I bumped onto it before. It's just the age of these wines. How beautifully vibrant they stay with even after so much time. So, and I guess the one of the things that's really contributed is the endorsement of the style, either through wine shows such as yours or journalists. It's really hard as in a commercial world with wine, and to have those endorsements, is beyond our expectations. Or we always said that we would like this wine to be world class, and when we win global awards, it's it's just fantastic. Really, it just sort of blows you away to be up there with the peers around the globe.
So whilst we're talking about the wines, here are the wines that were entered into the 2022 Global Fine Wine Challenge. We've got from left to right, the Ed Carr Late Disgorged 2007. On the far right, we have the Grand Vintage 2014, and slap bang in the middle, we have the museum release Blanc de Blanc 2001, which was the trophy winner and the wine of show. And I remember a conversation with you, Ed. You may not recall it, but I remember when we were talking with Accolade, with Arras, prior to the entries coming in. I don't think the 2001 was on the nominated list. And I think you sent an email saying, what do you think about throwing this one in? And we did. And the rest is history. But here is, I'm just going to pop it up on the screen. Here is the 2001 museum release Blanc de Blanc with some notes from one of the judges, Andrew Caillard, Master of Wine. Describes the wine as well-developed, toasty grilled nut, amontillado aromas and marzipan notes, amazingly complex nutty nougat flavors, superb mid-palate richness and fresh linear acidity, creamy long bubbles, multi-layered wine of great complexity and freshness, magnificent 98 points. And when Andrew likes a wine, he types and he types and he keeps typing. We have to edit some of these things back. But Ed, can you tell us a little bit about this wine? I mean, before we started recording, I was talking about the amazing packaging that comes along with here. I've taken the bottle out, obviously, but it's an amazing package. It makes a phenomenal gift for a wine lover. And I've got, where is it? I've got the bottle up here on the shelf. I don't know how readily available these bottles are. I don't know if you know, but they're high on the collector's radar. I've seen one or two bottles come into the warehouse that we use in Sydney to house all the stock. I've seen one or two collectors with one bottle, and that's it. So tell us a bit about the wine if you can.
Yeah, 2001 was a great year, really. It again, the wines were so lean and tight, and they aged so gracefully. They almost like refused to age. This wine had, something like 15 years on lees, and it was disgorged way back in September. Let me think, 17. So it's had that time on lees, and then another 5 years under cork. And I think it's still remarkably fresh. It's got all of those lovely aged characters that Andrew so clearly pointed out in words that I don't usually use, but when I'm writing. But that's his job, and he does it well. So, I think it's got it has really moved into that sort of age spectrum, and I really agree with the Amontillado. Sort of, you often get that sort of slightly sherified character in aged sparkling, slightly nutty and aldehydic, and that's, that sort of links into those words really well. But we always were fans of Chardonnay with Arras, and the Blanc de Blanc was first released in 01, from the 01 vintage, and then we skipped a few, then went to 04, just due to lack of supply. But when we first released the 01, not as the museum, it was 9 years on lees, and we thought it's got a long way to go yet. So that was the museum concept. So we kept about 400 bottles back of the 01, and then re-released it after 15 years on lees.
So question, sorry,
yeah.
carry on.
No, go on. That's fine. You go.
The question is, I've got a bottle of the 2008 Blanc de Blanc. This was from 2021's challenge. Is this a mini version of this trophy winner? I mean, there's differences in the age. This is an 8-year tirage, and this is obviously a 15-year. But are there similarities in the pedigree of these two wines, in their winemaking and their handling?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, they'll all show their vintage variation, but the museum release is from a selection of years of this, for want of a better word, the standard vintage Blanc de Blanc. So we've still got the 08 Blanc de Blanc on yeast lees, and we'll release that in a few years' time. So and that one I'm really looking forward to, because that 08 was another brilliant year as well. So I guess, that's come from this confidence of the age of the wines, how well they age. So it was just an extremely strong year. A blend of regions, predominantly Pipers in this one. Pipers River, Derwent Valley, and some of the northwest, which is really cold. I don't actually have it there. It's west of Launceston and past the Tamar. So heading out towards Devonport, there's a small number of vineyards out there, and that's really cold country as well. So
is Devonport to the left of number one? Is that right?
Yeah. Yep. So there's got some fruit early from there, and it just has great aging potential. So basically all Chardonnay, that amount of time on lees, a very low dosage, probably around about 3 grams per litre sugar. So it's almost zero dosage. And we're very strong believers in the value of time under cork as well. So after Disgorged, we're using a very high quality cork, and we think that adds that tertiary evolution to the wine. So secondary evolution with the time on lees, and then tertiary with the time on cork, and this has had 5 years under cork. So that's why we asked you if you'd be so kind as to include it in the lineup, because we just thought it looked so strong.
It's one of the best decisions we've ever made. But let's move on to the Ed Carr late Disgorged 2007. So Andrea Pritzker, Master of Wine, who's also one of the judges, describes the wine as medium lemon with a fine bead, open, slightly grassy with lemon accents, crisp and dry, smoky and linear, good struck match complexity on the finish, distinctive, 95 points. What can you tell us about this one, Ed?
2007 was an interesting year. It was in the sort of drought years, and traditionally this wine is, say, 65% Chardonnay and 35% Pinot Noir. But in the drought year of 2007, a lot of the very good vineyards had quite a bit of frost damage, and the Chardonnay fared better, way better than the Pinot Noir, not only in crop loss, but the Pinot Noir just didn't seem to have the strength after those really hard, dry sort of spring weather. So This wine is actually like 78% Chardonnay, which is quite out of kilter for that label, but blending it to style on the bench, we kept coming back towards this 78% Chardonnay. And every time we'd said that can't be right, we've got to get some more Pinot Noir into it. It really didn't work. So we stayed with our original findings of that small amount of Pinot Noir. So it is very Chardonnay predominant more than general. But it was that cold year. And it's just, again, with this label too, we're trying to look at the integration of Chardonnay and Pinot. So we're blending to that sort of seamlessness between Chardonnay and Pinot. So Chardonnay on the front, Pinot Noir on the back. And it ended up working really well. In the end, we said sort of what the hell, we'll go with 78% Chardonnay and see what it brings. And that was the result.
Where does the Pinot come from for the Ed Carr?
That would have been Upper Derwent at that point. So as you head up the Derwent, about an hour and a half west of Hobart, you get into areas called Glenora, and then later on pushing out towards Hamilton. So it's very much in the top end of the river valley there. So very much inland. And so in the latter years, our stronger Pinots are coming from the inland vineyards, and Chardonnay is doing particularly well on the more coastal sites. But this one had that really long time on lees as well. This label is always a minimum of 10 years on lees. This one's way over. Oh. And I think 14 years from memory. I might be right. And but again, it just expresses that it's on the neck label. There's some
14 years. There you go.
Yeah, there's a guess. But yeah, they just developed that sort of extra aged prestige cuvee sort of feel with just this stronger sort of moving into toffee apple and honey and that sort of characters really. Again, very dry, around about 2.6 grams per litre sugar.
The wine being named Ed Carr after yourself,
Yep.
What was the reason for that, if you don't mind me asking? Was it you wanted to have your name on a wine, or someone nominated it? Or was it an idea? Was it marketing?
Nominated it. It was actually the chief winemaker at the time, Peter Dawson, suggested that'd be a good idea, and I didn't argue. So there it is.
Hey, let's move on to the next one. This is the Grand Vintage. Let's pop it up on the screen. So this is the Arras Grand Vintage 2014. And again, Andrea Pritzker, Master of Wine, says medium lemon hue, fine bead, restrained bouquet, fine lemony chalky acid, well-integrated mousse, lively and fresh with a savory toasty finish, superb persistence, and 96 points. And here is...
The Arras Grand Vintage was the original wine of the sort of Arras range, I guess, that Chardonnay predominant, but this one's back to the true form of being around about 65% Chardonnay. And it's aged for 7 years prior to release. And 14 was a pretty interesting year. It was a very wet spring, a lot of hen and chicken in the vines, and we really had to let the fruit hang out for a long time to let some of the bigger berries ripen. So it was always a full style. Had a really intense mineral sort of character from that vintage. So Chardonnay driven, say 65%-ish. 7 years on lees for that, and it's just opening up really nicely now. I think that's really true to style for that label. And again, bone dry. It's just under 3 grams per litre sugar. And that wine is released at that age every year, and I think that's one of the sort of plateaus in quality you get with time on lees. They're around about that 6 to 7 year mark. They look very, very strong. Both of those last 2 wines had significant amounts of new oak in them. The 07 was 8% and the 14 was 10. So the Chardonnay was fermented in a new French oak barrique. And again, that adds that structure and some of that toastiness, I think.
I've got another wine here. This is also, I think, from 2021. This is the Rosé 2006 vintage that I went and pulled out of the archive. You make, how many wines do you make in the range? Is it 6 wines?
Yeah, in the traditional method, yeah, not every year. So the museum releases aren't every year, but the core of the wines are the Brut Elite, which is a 4-year on lees wine. That gets expanded this year because we're doing a Brut Elite Rosé, which is coming out as well this year in September. And then the vintage range is the Blanc de Blanc, the Grand Vintage, and the Rosé, and the late Disgorged vintage as well. So that's 6. Yeah, coming to 6 this year. And we also releasing magnums in the vintage range 1 year older than the 750ml.
Magnums, party in a bottle.
Yeah, so that's one of the new things to come out to the system as we move along.
Fantastic. Ed, Tasmania, your quote is saying, I remember a cool climate tour in 1998 of regions that we now take for granted. We visited Tasmania, 46 hectares of vines in 1988. Today, over 2,000 hectares of vines. That's pretty inspiring. What is it about the Apple Isle that is so perfectly suited to growing world-class fruit and grapes?
It's climate driven. Obviously, it's a very cool climate, influenced by the Antarctic Ocean. So you really do get all the moderating effects of the very cold water and the weather coming off the cold water. I think also too that a major point is the rain shadow effect of the wilderness high country on the west coast. Most of the rain falls on the west coast, so it makes grape growing a lot easier if it's a drier climate. So Hobart's got a lower rainfall than Adelaide. It is really a rain shadow from the centre of Tasmania to the east coast. Piper's River is a little bit more humid and cloudy, a little bit rolls down from the east coast of Australia, but basically it's very cool and it's very dry. There's a great range of soils there. I don't think anybody really has worked the soils out entirely yet. There's great vineyards on really quite cracking clays all the way through to sandy soils on the river flats and the red dirt like you get from Piper's River, like that deep red loam. So I'm sure soil does have a big influence, and I think it's mainly because it's usually quite ancient soil and not very fertile. But it's really the climate, that cool climate, that drives it along. And it's really quite sunny. It is, the sun strength is quite high, the air is very clear, and so the sun intensity is really driving fruit characters into the vines.
And what do you see as the future for Tasmania in terms of Australia, say in the next 5 years? Do you think there's going to be more and more development in Tas? And do you see it expanding maybe? I mean, we know Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, to a lesser extent, Pinot Meunier, correct me if I'm wrong, Riesling, but do you see anything else happening in the Apple Isle?
There's certainly the growth is just massive. I came back from there last week and learnt of other major developments, and it's not just 1 or 2 hectares, it's like hundreds of hectares in a very short space of time. So it's just seeing this massive boom in confidence, and that can be in all of the known areas such as Pipers River down the east coast, the Cole River, and the Derwent Valley. There's going to be a lot more fruit and ultimately a lot more wine coming through. But the confidence seems to be there. It's still only 0.5% of the total Australian wine make. So it's relatively tiny, but it's very high value, of course. I think it's really exciting that there's a lot of fruit being planted. I guess there'll be a lot more brands come onto the market as well, as people want to use this fruit in their own brands, or whether there'll be more of a supply for the existing labels as well.
Yeah.
But there's certainly no lack of confidence. There's quite strong irrigation schemes sponsored by the government and such that are opening up areas which should be great for viticulture. But
So
also,
do you mean new areas that we don't know as yet?
New areas within areas, I guess. I haven't seen anything that's sort of really out there in terms of a whole new area, but knowing how much these individual sites vary, by the kilometre, there's going to be some really interesting options for wine styles. Sparkling wine still making up about just short of half of the use of the fruit. I can't remember the exact number, but sparkling wine is the major part of it, and Pinot Noir is a red, and then Chardonnay is a white after. But seeing a little bit of Shiraz and such in some of the warmer sites. I don't think Australia's Tasmania, I should say, is so affected by the higher temperatures we're seeing with global warming as some of the other vineyards on the mainland. But it's certainly changing, and it's becoming a lot more variable as well, which I guess is a bit more of a worry too.
Yeah. Ed, what's the biggest challenge you're facing in your role right now, and how are you tackling it?
Well, that's a hard one to answer, really. I think our challenge is to keep doing what we're doing and not lose faith in all the different styles that we make, and particularly with Arras, it's a global challenge to see how far we can take the wine into international markets as well. We're seeing, I guess, on the domestic scene, and everybody always wants to know how these wines compare to champagne. We've seen people seeing them as an alternative to champagne, that they are prepared to try these wines, and if they like them, they will buy them as an alternative, not just purchase wines on country of origin, but purchase on brand and style. So one of our biggest challenge is to keep growing that market, from a niche to just to a larger but reasonable proportion of the market.
And do you have sufficient production to accommodate those expansions?
No, not really. I mean, that's one of the challenges as well, and also the time frames involved. I mean, we've got a very consistent base now of sourcing vineyards that we're certainly moving forward in volume, but when your youngest traditional method wine is 4 years on lees, nothing happens in a hurry. So our growth is constrained by the supply of fruit that we consider to be good enough. But with all of these other plantings happening, there's going to be great opportunities to expand.
Yeah, sure. Ed, if you could go back and give your 18-year-old self one piece of advice, what would it be?
I don't know. Never really close yourself into anything too early. I was flip-flopping between engineering and science, and I stayed with science, not really knowing what I would do. So I think it's really just to leave your options open for as long as you can, and then find out what really suits.
So whilst we're on that, what would be one piece of advice you'd give to someone that was starting out in your career, your specific genre or your specific niche? One piece of advice, what would it be?
I think it's in winemaking, to me, it's always attention to detail, right the way through from vineyard to the final product. You can't take your eye off the ball at any stage. And I've often used the line, I don't think there's any magic in it. It's just really attention to detail, being able to recognise qualities that you want and how to get them into your wines, and qualities that you don't want and keep them out. But a lot of winemaking is it's the day-to-day process that ultimately, all cumulative effect comes together in the final wine.
Yeah, paying attention, dotting the I's and crossing the T's. Ed, tell us your favourite wine memory.
I don't know, but I really couldn't answer that because I've got so many thoughts. And I didn't want to use a champagne example, but I will, because ultimately that sort of opened my eyes to things. I did a vertical tasting of Dom Perignon Enotex, which are now called P2s. And those wines went back to the 70s. And they just sort of blew me away from the point of view of how those wines were so elegant and powerful and aged so well. And I think, it sort of opened my eyes to really what sparkling wine can be. And, that was sort of a real inspiration to crafting some sparkling wines that would age exceptionally well.
How long ago was that happened?
About 15 years ago, I think.
Right, okay. Yeah.
And there's lots of memorable wine events too, but I think one of them was finding that 01 Blanc de Blanc just came back to us again, and that's I hadn't seen that wine for a couple of months, and it was still in store, and we got a bottle to check it, and that was one of those things that just sort of, there was a real wow factor in that as well. We knew it was pretty solid, but it's just suddenly jumped a hurdle and came up to the level that it is now.
Yeah. Ed, when you're walking around the cellar door, or you're doing your trip up and down, checking the fruit and doing the circuit of Tassie, what are you listening to in the car? What's your favorite music? What's your favorite artist that you gravitate towards, apart from the Stones?
I don't usually, because we're traveling in a group, so you don't usually inflict your music on anybody else. But over the years, I have a different favourite. And at the moment, this might not seem true, but Lady Gaga, I reckon, has really, just having a look at some of her work, it is just brilliant. And I just think there's a real talent that's often very out there. But that ability to reinvent yourself, much like David Bowie, I guess, always come back as a different person. Yeah.
Both very good points there. Ed, if you could be remembered for one thing, what would it be?
If it's wine only, there's lots of things that you'd like to be remembered for, but considering wine only, I think to have been able to follow this brand to the point where it is now, to sort of take the lead with this brand rather than following. There's been so many good people involved, from viticulture right the way through to winemaking, and all those gift boxes and labels that you saw. They're not my own work. They're people that are truly talented in those sorts of areas. It's been great to be able to ride that wave. And there's been some peaks and troughs, I can tell you. But to be remembered to initiate that brand, to get that started, and just then be able to roll it together to where it is now, I think that it will certainly be one of the boxes ticked.
Absolutely. Well, you've come a very long way in the 35 years. Master of your craft. Ed, thank you for your time. Have I missed anything else? Is there anything else that you wanted to add in while we're here?
No, I think we've covered it all. I can talk for these wines forever, but
you've got to go to work.
That's right. There is stuff to do. No, thank you for the opportunity to have a chat with you. And we are really proud of those 3 wines, apart from many others that you've got on the shelf there. So it's just great to be in this position now.
Yeah, we love seeing Arras every year when we get the nominations through. It's generally always has Arras. I can't remember a year where Arras has not been involved, and we send the email through to you, make sure that you're copied in, and it's always absolutely, and we love that, and it really gives a massive level of weight to the Australian nominations that represent the country in the challenge. So it's nice having that kind of support year in and year out. So thank you, and thank you to the team at Accolade, and hopefully one day I'll get down to your part of the world. I was down at Bay of Fires 2 or 3 years ago, and for some reason I didn't put the two together. So there you go. But just get on the plane and go down to Tassie, because we can do that now that we're able to travel again. But Ed, thank you so much for your time and for your valuable input and insights. It's been an absolute pleasure having a chat with you. And hopefully we'll get you on in 12 months again when you've lifted another trophy. So Ed, thank you for your time.
That'd be lovely. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you. That's it, everyone, for this episode of the Global Fine Wine Podcast. Thank you for joining us. We've got plenty of interviews lined up over the next 3 to 4 weeks, some amazing interviews with winemakers all around the world. Where are we now? We're moving into South Africa on Wednesday. We've got some winemakers from Canada a few days later. We're talking to some people from Washington State, from Oregon, and someone from New Zealand as well. So it's all happening. Please stay tuned, subscribe, like, share with your friends, and until next time, stay safe.